Many thanks, Simon. We've just got about 10 minutes for questions.
Just while we're waiting for that, I've got homeopathic sleeping pills here. And I'm going to take 7 or 8, and if I fall asleep before you do, then I'll admit that I'm wrong, but otherwise...
As I said, there's a mic back here in the middle. If anybody would like to ask a question, please do move to the mic, if we can keep them relatively short and sweet, because time is short. I can see about 5 or 6 people moving to the mic, so please keep them short. I've just mentioned lots of Simon's books are out in the bookstore.
Simon, given that the operation on the woman was conducted, the heart operation was conducted in China, and I have to presume that you don't read or speak Chinese, how did you find out about the dosage of the powerful pain sedatives and the local anaesthetic? And did the BBC know that and camouflage it? Or I mean, how was it discovered?
It was discovered because the BBC sent the footage to the Royal College of Anaesthetists, and I guess they don't speak Chinese either, but I think they could see the bottles that were being fed into tubes. They saw the whole footage, which was probably an hour long, as opposed to 2 minutes of edited. So they could see the bottles, they could look at the paraphernalia that was going on, and they could even name some of the sedatives that were being used. I think fentanyl was one, and there were others as well. So what I have to do as a journalist is rely on the best available evidence, which is what the Royal College could give me, and the BBC never disputed that. So in the end, I kind of think that was probably the best.
But the BBC were duped, were they?
Yes. It depends. It depends how critical you want to be how much you want to believe something determines how many awkward questions you ask. And if you've gone all the way to China, and you desperately hope this footage is going to be great, and you film it and so on, how many questions do you then ask actually, later on in the programme, there was a very, very tiny little caveat where the narrator said the patient was sedated and there was some numbing of the chest. So they did actually cover it. But I never heard that. And I asked lots of other people, I said, did you hear that little caveat? And it was the equivalent of the tiniest small print you can imagine. And nobody else caught that little caveat. And everybody else had this impression that this was just acupuncture and not general anaesthetic. So I think the BBC maybe tried to cover themselves, but didn't want to shout too loudly about what was really going on. Which is a great shame. After that complaint, they made a second series. And that's why I think it's really important that people complain. Because if you don't like what's on TV and you think you're being misled, or in print or anywhere, it's only through you complaining that things will change. The second series of alternative medicine was far more accurate and far more respectable as far as I was concerned. It was incredibly boring, but unfortunately, that's the way the truth is sometimes.
Thank you. Next question.
Do you think this debate has now moved on from what works and what doesn't work to who do you trust? I mean, if Novartis and Pfizer had their own acupuncture clinics and were charging $1,000 a go, do you think there'd be more of a scepticism about acupuncture then? I mean, is it part of, having that humble man down at the corner store doing these practices, part of the way people feel about whether or not do you trust them as opposed to big pharma?
I think people are perhaps rightly concerned about the big pharmaceutical industries, and it's their job to make vast amounts of money. And they do that by selling us clever advertising and trying to get their drugs through clinical trials and so on. And we need to be sceptical of that. But on the other hand, a large amount of these drugs that are invented by scientists at Pfizer and wherever change people's lives and are very beneficial. But we need to be sceptical, and we need to keep them honest, and we need to have regulation and everything. That same level of scepticism, I don't think we apply to alternative therapists. Because, as you say, it's the guy down the corner, it's the maverick, it's the independent, and so on. But this is also a global industry. I heard the other day that $2 billion each year is spent in Australia on alternative therapies. The herbal medicine market is worth $40 billion around the world. These are big interest groups. I'm currently having a libel battle. I'm being sued for libel by the British Chiropractic Association. Chiropractors are found around the world. They're a global industry, again, probably generating billions of dollars of profit. They've got their own interests. So what I'm keen on is a level playing field. If homeopaths can sell us placebos, and they do sell us placebos, and I think that's wrong, and part of the reason I think that's wrong is because I wouldn't want the big pharmaceuticals to sell us placebos. I think that would be scandalous. And every so often they get caught out, and there is a drug that turns out to be really just a placebo, and it gets removed from the shelves and there's a huge scandal. But that tends to be the exception, whereas for batch flower remedies, some herbal remedies, homeopathic remedies and so on, placebos are par for the course.
Hello, Simon. I'm a chiropractor.
Hi.
That being said, my question is not about that. And I must say, I do admire your ability to write the book that you've written and stand there and spout your beliefs, which is great. My question is about...
Hang on, they're not my beliefs. They're the results of scientific evidence.
Okay, your beliefs around the results of scientific evidence.
Yeah, okay, that's fair enough.
My question is about your book. And often in your book you defer to conventional medicine as the established wisdom.
Yeah.
And yet Time magazine on the 29th of June stated that medicine was the 8th leading cause of death in the US. And I heard the other day that prescription drugs now were the cause of more deaths in the US than illicit drugs since 2000, and that Australia has now reached that point as well. So I'm wondering if your considerable talents in examining these things would be better suited looking at that form of health rather than what seems to be, in most instances, fairly harmless.
Well, I think that there's a very good book on that subject, which actually covers alternative therapies and conventional medicine, a book called Bad Science by Ben Goldacre, where he criticises alternative therapies where they should be criticised, he criticises big pharmaceuticals where they should be criticised. Indeed, conventional medicine does cause lots of deaths. They cause harm. There are adverse effects and so on. There are people who are at death's door where there's nothing that can be done, but conventional medicine can't help them either, and the risks maybe tip them over the edge and so on. So there are excessive dosages given which can lead to death and so on. So there are surgeries that go wrong. It's a whole catalogue of disasters. But next to it, there's a huge number of benefits. So as well as being the leading cause of death, perhaps, greater than illicit drugs, there are also life-saving opportunities there as well. So it's always about a risk-benefit. And so my problem with chiropractic is, and do you treat colic and asthma, or do you focus mainly on the back?
What I found when I've read through your book is that you do focus very much on a particular symptom, whereas perhaps the philosophy of chiropractic is to look at the functionality of a body and restore function to the spine, which is inherently our focus, without necessarily looking at a particular disease, although I think there are perhaps some people who would view it more from a symptomatic point of view. So for my practice, it's about functionality, particularly of the spine.
But if somebody came to you, I saw an advert on the back page of one of the local free newspapers the other day, which was a chiropractor who clearly said they could treat asthma and colic and all sorts of things. So would you criticise those colleagues?
I would, because there's not the evidence to support that claim.
You would. It'd be great if you could write a letter to that newspaper and really campaign for that. Because one of my biggest problems with alternative therapists, and it's great that it's great that we can have this dialogue. One of my greatest problems is the lack of criticism within the community. The Cochrane Review, who I mentioned a second ago, actually offer a prize every year of $1,000 to whoever can come up with the greatest criticism of what they do and suggest how they can improve it. And yet, the level of criticism within alternative therapy, I think, is weaker. If you go to a conventional medical conference, you see, or a scientific conference, you see people criticizing each other and arguing for 3 or 4 days in a row. In alternative therapies, I kind of get the impression it's kind of we're all in it together. So if you can write and complain, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Hello, Simon. It's great to hear some of the questions. All I can say is that you're championing the cause of evidence and you're not wearing a flat jacket. I myself am from a background of starting with alternative medicine and then converted to ethical medicine and have been involved and a licence holder of an ethical drug in the country now. My question I'll say now, and it's already been brought up, and I think I'm going to claim $1,000, but is what happens when those who make the meta-analysis at Cochrane don't do their reading. And can I just emphasise that, and if you want to get into some specifics later, I will. But there is an unfortunate situation that often those that participate in conducting meta-analysis do not make sufficient distinctions between the trials they're assessing. And a ridiculous one that's currently been done is a very popular substance in this country. I think a lot of people in this audience will be taking some form of glucosamine or chondroitin, and I've been heavily involved in that for about 13 years. And can I just say that both Big Pharma and alternative medicine are both guilty of the same crimes, and they are also both ought to be applauded for how they've helped people. And what is often ignored is that substances that start out in alternative medicine end up being ethical substances, and that's a long history of that. Having said that, though, there's also some incredibly clever tricks done in ethical medicine, as there are an enormous number of clever tricks done in alternative medicine. And so my question is, what happens when those who are reading the science don't do enough reading of science? Those that champion the cause of popular belief and anecdote are not doing enough reading of science or participating in science either. So when is the dialogue going to start? Because God help us in the meantime.
Yeah, I think, we've looked at the negative side of alternative therapies, and there are good alternative therapies that are moving across. Things like, I mentioned it on the radio the other day, for irritable bowel syndrome, hypnotherapy seems to be backed up by evidence. It seems to work. Meditation for reduction of anxiety does seem to work, and so on. So there are, the evidence I don't want to be completely negative. But coming back to your point about meta-analyses, some of these systematic reviews are poorly conducted. And what you then find is they get published in a journal. If the journal is good, it will be refereed and criticised and pulled apart before it's published or rejected. So if you focus on the meta-analyses published in good journals, you have that first level of protection. Secondly, if there are still problems, then you see the feedback system, the critical letters and the critical reviews coming about the reviews. And then in due course, it may take a year or two, there'll be a further meta-analysis and hopefully edging closer and closer to the truth. The system is not perfect, but it's getting there. One example of that was in the past, you would conduct a trial, let's say on acupuncture. This happens in China quite a lot. It did happen quite a lot. People would conduct an acupuncture trial. The result would be negative, and the person wouldn't publish it because they didn't have time, they thought maybe they'd made a mistake, all sorts of reasons why that negative result would get put into the drawer and forgotten about. Next year they do another project, and the result will be positive. And this time they make the time, they put in the effort to make sure it got published. And that's known as publication bias. The positive results get published, the negative results get forgotten. When you look at the published data, you have a particularly rosy, an undeserved and rosy picture. Now the system is moving towards, if you conduct a trial, you have to lodge it somewhere and say, I'm going to conduct this trial and I will make the results public eventually, which gets rid of this problem of publication bias, which is part of the overall problem which I think you're talking about.
Yeah, hi, I'm Thomas. I'm a homeopath and just finished my doctoral research on non-specific factors in complementary medicine. 2 questions. Are you somebody who uses selective evidence? Regarding homeopathy, there are several meta-analyses that were actually positive on post-operative ileus, and on influenza was actually positive as well, even so they also said the evidence is weak, and also on osteoarthritic conditions. So when you say homeopathy is absolutely useless, you're ignoring some evidence.
The problem is we can debate the evidence over and over again, and we can cherry pick both. Now I could cherry pick this, and you can cherry pick that. What I'm trying to do is to pick the best meta-analysis. I think Cochrane. Everyone deserves criticism, and Cochrane even asked for criticism. But I think they're as fair-minded and as independent as anybody. So I'm trying to quote the most unbiased evidence. One of the fair criticisms, I think, is that a lot of these trials aren't individualized. Homeopathy, as a homeopath, you'll know you treat patients in an incredibly individual way. And therefore, this system of trials is meaningless.
That's right. And actually, that's the other thing, that the overall outcome of homeopathy, comparing homeopathic treatment, the whole caboodle, including the therapeutic relationship with other non-specific factors, compared with conventional treatment, often is as good, or homeopathic treatment is even more successful than conventional treatment.
Right, but what I would then say is if you think it's all the other things that you're doing, then get rid of the homeopathic bit, do all the other things you're doing, give it a different name, and I'd praise you to the roost. I think that'd be fantastic. But just coming back to the idea of individualised therapy, that's one of the criticisms people say, well, these Cochrane trials aren't individualised. But as you'll know, there have been proper, high-quality individualised trials where we treat everybody here as an individual. I give you everybody here an individual therapy, and I leave it at the door, and I say, on the way out, just collect it. And I do the same with this group over here, except when you leave, you all get the same placebo pills. And when you do those kind of high-quality trials, there's no difference. Same with animals. People say, well, it works on my pet, and my pet doesn't know about the placebo effect. So again, you go away and you do these trials, and you do it with cattle with mastitis or calves with diarrhea. This herd reacts the same way as that herd, and the effects seem to be zero. One of the most worrying things about it, and the reason why it worries me, is that I can go back to England in a couple of weeks, and I can set myself up as a homeopath. And I can just start treating people as soon as I like. I can start charging them as soon as I like. Now, I can't treat animals. If you're going to treat an animal, you have to be a fully qualified vet. But anybody can treat humans, because we're not that special. Which is why this is a subject that I really care about, that I think we need to get to the evidence and represent the evidence fairly.
But could we finish off by thanking Simon again? You can also thank him